Consider this metaphor. Season 3 is to Rick and Morty what the prequels were to Star Wars. A very high bar was set for it, and not only did it not reach that bar, but at some points it actually struggled with some basic fundamentals of its medium. Because of that, hardcore fans of the series were enraged, and most new fans that didn't have the same context thought it was decent. In this video, I want to go over why I thought this season was bad. And more importantly, I want to go over some revelations I've had about why I've bashed this season as much as I have. If I can't convince you of why this season was subpar, hopefully I can at least show you where I'm coming from. But before we jump into it, it's time for all the introductory crap. I'd like to give my deepest respect and admiration for Dan Harmon, Justin Roiland, Ryan Ridley, and everyone else involved with Rick and Morty. I once loved this show, and if I didn't, I wouldn't be spending my time writing, recording, and editing videos like this. This video is my fourth and final attempt to summarize my feelings about Season 3, and will be serving as a replacement video for the two that I've previously unlisted. Neither of them are as good as this video, but if you want to go watch them, you can find a link to them in the description or find them in my original videos playlist. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. Point number 1. Quality check. Let me pitch you some questions. Did the plot twist with Toxic and Healthy Morty intrigue you like the plot twist with the triple layer simulation did? Did the Vindicators leave as strong and as marketable an impression on you as Mr. Meeseeks did? Did Jerry's struggles with his kids and the alien lady endear you and give you a sense of fulfillment in the same way as Jerry handled the Plutonians? Did Beth panicking over possibly being a clone have the same emotional impact to you of Morty having to bury his own body? Did Rick monologuing to Beth about her intelligence and the universe have any of the profoundness to you of Morty revealing his self-grave to Summer to try and make her stay? And God forbid, did any of the skits and Morty's mind-blowers entertain you like the improv and interdimensional TVs did? Did anything in Season 3 live up to the highlights of Season 1? And even beyond the highlights, did the standard of episodes feel up to the same quality as Season 1? I don't think it did. Every time I watch through this season, I see so many problems. Pacing and spacing issues were rampant, actual laughs were scarce. The majority of the character development was predictable and uninteresting. The overall arc for the season was lame. I believe that, objectively, Season 3 did not live up to the same standard that Season 1 and 2 had set for it. So let's blitz through each episode and dive into some specifics. Episode 1. At the end of Season 2, we were led to believe that Rick was ultimately sacrificing himself for the good of his family, and that somehow someone was going to break him out of prison. This episode says, psych, he doesn't actually care about his family, it was all just a chess game to him. I find that to be pretty lame, because I actually liked that they were having Rick do something good for a good reason for once. But other than that, this was a very solid episode. Episode 2 was, once again, a solid episode until you take it in context with the rest of the season. Where the fuck does badass road warrior Summer go for the rest of the season? Why is the only other plot she gets about her crying over breaking up with Ethan and fucking up her body in response? Also, doesn't it seem a little wrong to have Morty and Summer come to terms with a divorce the very next episode after it happens? And why have Summer have this neat coming to terms scene with Jerry when the next time we see them together she acts like she hasn't a drop of respect for him? How can you consider either of these two things to be character development when they're completely ignored later on in the season? But what irks me the most about this kind of thing is that they're trying to have this overarching plot of the divorce throughout the season, but don't actually bother to let anything else arc over multiple episodes. Why are you taking a half step? Either commit to being Venture Brothers for a season, or stick to being Futurama. Whole ass one format. Don't half-ass both. For episode 3, I want you to imagine how absurd it would feel if you were watching a cop movie and they just literally stopped the car chase at a red light and spent the next 5 minutes lecturing the police about how they're endangering civilians. That is what this episode is. I don't care how much you liked or hated the fact that the therapy monologue was bringing Rick down a peg. It absolutely kneecaps the entertainment value for the rest of the episode. I can see no good reason that someone would write like this unless they actually valued shaming their character over making a good entertainment product. And that's really dumb. Episode 4's pacing is horrid, there's no proper climax or resolution, and both Rick and Morty feel off-kilter at several points in this episode. It tries to make up for its shortcomings with a charmless Avengers knockoff, but fails to get us attached to any of the characters before killing them with a gratuitous amount of violence. It's a bad episode. Dan Harmon even went out of his way to call it the worst episode of Rick and Morty, and it's not hard to see why. Episode 5. The Rick and Jerry plotline was fantastic, and I have nothing negative to say about it. It was one of the few times this season that I felt like I was watching a regular episode of the show. However, the Summer, Beth, and Morty plotline was pretty bad, but that was likely due to the lack of time it was able to get. Not that I think that it should have eaten more time out of the superior Rick and Jerry plotline, however. Also, seriously, who the wrote in Morty disfiguring Ethan? That was horrendously out of character. It was so out of character, it had people theorizing that our Morty had been replaced with evil Morty. Episode 6 had much the same problems as Episode 4. The pacing was awful, the dialogue was off-kilter, and the intrigue just wasn't that interesting. This episode was carried by a somewhat interesting premise and over-the-top Mortying, but otherwise failed at some basic fundamentals of TV episode writing. Remember when Rick and Morty episodes had an interesting premise and an interesting twist and didn't have problems with fundamentals? Remember M. Night Shyamalan's? Because I do. Episode 7. I have absolutely nothing bad to say about this episode. It was easily the best episode of the season, and definitely one of the best in the series altogether. Episode 8. Most of the skits were dry and unfunny, and the premise of memory erasing was not explored well at all. There was so much potential in this memory erasing premise. Rick has literally been controlling Morty's inner universe through his memories, puppeting around Morty's feelings and personality. That's fucking incredible, and could have been expanded on to great effect. But instead, they decided to go with an amnesia plot, because that was the only way to shoehorn in more bad skits. I would have been able to look the other way about the shoddy story if there had still been actual improv, because I absolutely loved the improv. Even when the improv wasn't as funny, I still appreciated that there was improv in the show. But without the improv, Morty's Mind Blowers turns into an inferior version of 60 Minutes on both sides of its two-sided core. It sacrificed good drama for mediocre comedy, when previously it had excellent of both. And that is what I mean by this season objectively failing. Episode 10. This clone Beth thing needed time to sit. Tammy and Bird Person got a whole season to sit. Morty's Self-Grave got at least a whole episode and some implied passage of time. Bringing this point back up immediately was a very bad move. It was also not reintroduced in any kind of powerful way like Morty's Self-Grave was. Beth just calls Rick in the middle of his much more interesting story and has an awkward phone conversation with him and then screams. Can you see why maybe these two things weren't equal? There are a lot of other problems with the Clone Beth thing, but I'm going to leave them be, because I think all of the other problems would have been improved if this had just had time to sit. But I do want to say, I'm going to get over the fact that Harmon was blatantly taking out his rage against with this episode, because there was a lot of really decent action that wasn't halted for no reason and actually felt like a good transition into the falling action of the episode. If they want to stuff real-world politics into this show, at least in this episode they did it in a way that I can begrudgingly get behind. With really good action that doesn't end abruptly to shame me for enjoying it. I saved episode 9 for last because I have the most to say about it. I seriously could do a whole video just on this episode alone, but in the interest of brevity, here are the two things that are the most important to me. First, the way Jerry is treated in this episode is perhaps the best example of episodes not living up to previous standards. Consider Jerry's Pluto adventure in Something Wicked This Way Comes. Yes, he let go to his head, but at the end of the day, he does the right thing and comes out of it with a lesson. Consider also Jerry in Big Trouble in Little Sanchez. He's backed into a corner because of his meekness, but in the end, finds the strength to turn the tables and comes out of it with a lesson. In episode 9, he is put into a situation that has both the going to his head of the Plutonians and him being too meek to face the situation of the therapy monsters. But by having the problem resolve itself without Jerry's involvement, they've just made him a constant parade of f***ups with literally no redemption. By not having Jerry do the right thing and learning a lesson, this episode has objectively failed to live up to the standards set by previous ones, and leaves an unwholesome stain on Jerry's character. The second thing is that Rick's intelligence monologue to Beth at the end of this episode has none of the same power that Morty's self-grave monologue to Summer did. I want you to actually listen to these two back to back and compare them for yourself.